Welcome to Damsels in Dialogue, a podcast dedicated to female protagonists in fiction, film, and the stage, co-hosted by India Marie Paul
and Katie Zetter. For our inaugural season, we will be focusing on 8 animated heroines from Walt Disney feature films.
This episode, we find ourselves tangled up with a classic Grimm fairy tale and the world's most well-known maiden in a tower, Rapunzel.
Let down your hair.
Let down your hair.
That's the music, right? That's the music.
Yeah, that's the music. Let's add that in of us screaming that at the beginning.
Yes.
Oh, I love this movie. And I remember when it came out, seeing it in theaters with my mom. So this is in 2010. And I immediately loved it. And then I was so happy to revisit this movie. And I just fell more and more in love with it the more I focused in on it. And I just... it was amazing. So let's kind of dive into the origins of Rapunzel. We all kind of are familiar with the Grimm retelling of it, and that's what they claim they based it on for Disney. And it's kind of set in this German-esque village around the late 1700s, early 1800s. But the actual first story where we kind of meet this character is in Italy. So there was a group of tales written by Jean-Baptiste Bastille. I believe I've said that correctly.
I think so.
In 1634. And he wrote a story called Petronella, and that name translates to little parsley. Rapunzel is kind of a German version of rampion, which is a type of flower. So we'll get there.
Okay.
But in this one, it's Petronella, and it means little parsley. And I actually think this version of the Rapunzel character is probably closest to the spunk of Disney's Tangled, because she kind of saves herself from a tower. She is trapped by an ogress in this one, and there's a couple other ones that I'll talk about. But in this version, in Petronella, her mother is craving parsley and wants it from, she's pregnant and wants it from the ogress's garden. So the husband goes and gets it, brings it to her, and the ogress is angered and is going to hurt them, and then instead says, "Give me your child and we'll call it even."
So this is where the Sondheim took it.
Sondheim is for Into the Woods, specifically quotes the Grimm versions, but all of them are derived from this. This Italian tale, which is really cool. And unlike a lot of other folklore, oral tradition fairy tales, there's not a lot of proof of it being around. And of course, there's always a maiden in a tower story. That's a whole category of fairy tales, is the maiden in a tower.
Right.
Fairy tales in general were kind of derived from women telling each other stories, which I find really interesting. They weren't necessarily for children. A lot of the oral tradition of folklore and fairy tales were women doing weaving and talking and telling each other things and creating things, which is really wonderful. And I find it really interesting that I've found that women connect more to fairy tales in general, and that it was a tradition that kind of got passed through a more matriarchal line in general before the Grimms collected all of the tales and all that. But in this one, the mother wants the parsley, dad goes to get it, ogress gets the firstborn child. The child grows up for 7 years with the mom, and the ogress, every time she comes back, tells the little girl, I don't really know why she keeps walking by the ogress's house, tell your mom to remember her promise. And the mom apparently got sick of the empty threat, so she told Petronella to tell the ogress, well, then take it. And so the ogress does. When Petronella goes up to the ogress, it's like, my mom says... So she takes her, locks her in a tower. Her hair grows forever long. She's beautiful. She's beautiful in all the stories. In some of them, she sings. And that's what attracts... Yeah, that's what attracts the prince in a lot of them. But in this one, what stood out to me is her and the prince actually kind of grow and fall in love. He comes across her. He does not trick her to get up in the tower, and that's what happens in the other versions. He kind of sees her, and it says that they talk and get to know each other, and then he kind of visits her. So I just imagine them yelling from the tower. I don't know how. There's no specifics about how they communicate.
What's your favorite color?
That's what I really want to believe. That's what happens. Maybe we're supposed to assume he goes up. But I just like
carrier pigeon letter.
Yeah, I just like the idea of them yelling back and forth to this tower. And then he eventually comes and visits her in the tower, and they fall for each other, and they hatch a plan to get out together behind the ogress's back. And there's a gossip in the town who overhears their plan to leave together and tells the ogress. And the ogress tells the gossip that, she can't leave because there are 3 magical acorns hidden in the rafters, that it's a spell to keep her there. But Petronella hears the gossip and the ogress's talk. So it's a whole bunch of pick a little, talk a little gossip happening. And then when the prince comes over next, tells him to climb into the rafters and get the acorns, and then they escape. And so they start running away. The ogress follows after them, and then she throws each magic acorn is like a beast that tries to attack the ogress, and she outsmarts 2 of them. And then the last one, she's wearing the skin of a donkey and forgets to take it off, and so she gets attacked by the last animal. It's very odd. But Petronella is the one throwing them. So there's this element of her using her resourcefulness and her smarts to outwit the ogress and to get away. And then the prince is reunited with his family in that, and they all become royal, and it's all happily ever after. But that one, she's a little spunkier. She has a little more agency. They actually kind of fall in love. Why
wouldn't they pick that story? Like, Disney's so weird about, they pick a story they really want to do, but they're so adamant about doing this specific version, but then they always change it a bunch. Why?
Well, yeah, and
why pick the Grimm if they could do that one? It lines more with the movie.
It does. I think the heroine herself does. And this one doesn't have the magical tears, which the Grimm version does.
True.
And I believe Parsonet does, which is kind of the next iteration of this tale that was famous. The Grimm one is the most well-known. And that's the one that we all have seen in Into the Woods, that we all kind of, if we go into the darker actual fairy tales, we believe that's the original. Parsonet was a French version of it, and that came out in 1697 by Charlotte Rose de la Force. And she actually wrote it while she was locked away in an abbey because she was part of lots of scandals in the French court. I believe this was Louis XIV time, so the court was its own mess. I love that gossip if you ever are interested in that. But she was someone who believed in marrying for love. And she's someone who tried to marry her love, but her family found out because he wasn't rich or he wasn't high enough ranked. So I think they annulled it or they broke them apart. And then she was involved in a different scandal because of the story she was writing, and then got sent to a convent to be away from the court. And this is where she wrote. So it's very much affected by her being trapped away too. So I thought that was really, really interesting. But in this one, a fairy hides Parsonet away instead of an ogress. Because, fairies weren't all...
They were primarily evil. To be honest.
And that's what's really... when we get to the... okay, I have to work my way there. So Parsonet, the fairy actually really loved Parsonet and thought she was beautiful and tried to protect her by locking her away in a silver tower with all of these things. And she was a painter, and she was very active in learning. So she kind of had a luxurious tower stay rather than being trapped in a drab ogress's tower.
Right.
So there's a little more of... it feels like Gothel's in there a little bit with the...
right. She had everything she potentially asked for. Who didn't want Rapunzel's bedroom?
Yeah.
In the tower.
Yeah. She was kind of given everything that she could want. And the prince comes and hears her sing. I believe he tricks her with the let down your hair. I believe that's when that started to come into play. Goes up, fall in love. I think this is also, Parsonet is the one where the fairy finds out, cuts off her hair, prince gets tricked, and then she has sent Parsonet away into a cottage, not into the desert like the Grimm, but to the cottage.
Yeah, okay.
Away from the prince, and then the prince, this might be where he jumps from the tower and gets split. So there's a little bit more of the blinding that you find in the Grimms too, but then ultimately they meet up. Rapunzel bears twins in that one too, I believe.
Classic.
I believe.
Classic fairy tales.
They all start to blend together.
They have kids.
Yes. They all are starting to blend together a little bit. But then what is different about this version of it is there's some curse on her. They eat food and it doesn't work because the fairy doesn't want them to be together. Oh, hi, puppy. The fairy finds them, or they go to the fairy and she sees them in love. And because she loves Parsonet, she relieves the curse and lets them be together. It's still a happy ending. It's a little bit different. It's a little closer to where Grimm ends up.
Yeah.
Because this was a famous tale in the French court. And then Frederick Schultz, who's German, he's the one who translated it almost directly into German. So this was in 1790, and he changed it to Rapunzel instead of Parcenet. And this is where the Grimms took it from. So they took it from Schultz's translation of Parcenet.
So do you know why they picked Rapunzel?
Petronella and Parcenet were both referring to parsley. And then Schultz decided to name her after a different plant. So instead of parsley, he named her after rampion. So rampion is a flower plant, and it actually looks very much like the golden flower. So basically you eat the leaves and the roots. The Disney version took the rampion flower and made it magical, basically.
Right. Cool.
And that's what the mother wanted to eat instead of parsley and from the garden. So the Grimms took the translated Parcenet, which became Rapunzel, and stripped it down completely to make it feel like a folklore from oral tradition tale. So it's only about 3 pages long.
Right.
It was first released in 1812. And then completely redrafted for 1857, which was a little more child-friendly. They it was a fairy in 1812, and then they changed, it's child-friendly again. There's a little less sexual obviousness in the in the 7th edition, which is 57. But in the first one, it's a little more blunt about things. There's a little less information. There's still a fairy. It didn't turn into a sorceress until the 1857 version, which is the one that's more popular today.
Right.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Grimm tale, its mother wanted Rampion from the garden, stole it, was going to be cursed, so she got the baby taken away, put in a tower, hair grew forever long, was trapped there. Prince walks by, hears the singing, tricks her, says, let down your hair the same way the sorceress does, because he sees her from the bushes. They fall in love, and then getting pregnant, and that's how the witch finds out.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1812 version, which is a little less kid-friendly, she gets pregnant. And then as Gothel, because it's Dame Gothel, is the sorceress. This time it's a fairy, because it's 1812. And she says, Mother, I don't understand why my clothes don't fit me anymore. And it's because she's pregnant.
I do remember that.
And so she finds out and gets upset. And then in the 1857 version, she accidentally says, you're easier to pull up than the prince. So she lets it, or something to that effect. So she lets it slip that she's about to see the prince, or that he's coming later, that it's not that she's gotten pregnant. And then she gets she has twins when she's banished into the desert in the 57 version. She's not pregnant yet. So she gets banished to the desert, walks around, bears twins. In both versions, eventually she'll be there. And the prince comes back, gets tricked to thinking it's her, goes up to the tower, gets told that they're never going to see each other, and throws himself from the tower. In my brain, he got pushed. He did not get pushed in the Grimm fairy tale. He threw himself dramatically from the tower. Did
romance.
not die. Did not die. Got blinded by like a thistle bush at the bottom of the tower.
At the bottom.
Wanders around aimlessly. And then meets up with Rapunzel, who's wandering around aimlessly. She cries on him. Her tears heal his blindness. And then they return to his castle all happy. So that's the origin story.
I really gotta think, like, Walt Disney, what were you, like, these stories are cool. I love fairy tales. But, like, why were those, like, the Grimms and the Hans Christian Andersen? Walt was like, ooh, these would make a great movie for 5-year-olds.
Let's do this. This is brilliant. Yeah, it's they're very dark, and that's what they did change it to be more kid friendly.
Oh my gosh,
in
yes.
the 1857. But
sorry, I think I meant for the movie.
No, the movie, yes. Oh, they did great things with it, but you can kind of see where they got the flower came from the rampion flower in the German version. You can see the fact she's a painter and this luxury tower idea coming from the Parcenet version. So you can see that they did their work and they studied it. And it's a tale that I think took so long to get done by Disney because it's actually really plot driven. There's not a lot of character development. It's very especially in the Grimm version. There's a little more personality in the first Petronella and Personette. But in the Grimm version, it's very, this happens and this happens and this happens and this happens. So she doesn't really have personality. It's very archetypal. Like there's not a lot of depth to it. It's 3 pages long. So for Disney to be like, let's make this wonderful, like you don't really know if she's a wonderful person. You know, she's pretty and that's about it.
Yeah.
So it's a little different.
Disney made the character development, like took the story and ran with it, if you will.
Yeah. And it's one of the shorter kind of origin dives I've done because there's a couple stories and then they're really short.
Yeah.
And the Maiden in the Tower idea was very popular among fairy tales, I think, because they were women driven and that women felt trapped in marriage. They felt trapped by their status. They physically felt trapped. There's a lot of that in fairy tales that I think comes from the oral tradition of women talking to each other and collecting these stories. And that's why there's so much imagery in fairy tales of weaving and household activities that happen because usually we're talking to each other while you were doing them. I always find that really interesting and that the Grimms are known for collecting them, but it actually was them collecting what other women have collected for them and them translating it.
Yeah, I think it's known pretty widely that they collected the stories, but I don't think it's as widely known that they're from women.
Yeah, a lot of salons. Like I was listening to a really wonderful podcast. I believe it was Singing Bones. It kind of dives into fairy tales and histories. And they went on to explain about the Wild Sisters and how they were a group of women that the Grimms were friends with who really helped collect for them a lot of tales from their salons and from friends they knew and finding the best versions of things. So a lot of them dictating tales were straight from women telling them. So it's not really as if they were crafting them to be different. They were kind of just writing what women were dictating to them. So, you know, I have feelings about the fact that it's the Grimm fairy tales, but in reality, they didn't even go out and knock on everyone's door. They were just like handed a pile of stories from the Wild Sisters, like, and a lot of other friends and salons. Right. So there's this like beautiful romantic idea of the Grimm brothers knocking and going around on everyone and finding them. That's not what happened. Not at all. But Disney, Disney talked about doing Rapunzel starting in the 1940s. It was kind of discussed right after the success of Snow White.
A lot of them. He had, for some reason, all of the fairy tales. He's like, let's do them all right now.
Yeah, well, everyone kind of knew them.
To do all of them.
It was smart, but they must not have found something to dig into, so that kind of got shelved. And it was only discussed for a little bit in the 40s, and then it didn't come back up until 1996. Glenn Keane started developing it, and he's an animator I love. And he started developing the story of Rapunzel and figuring out how to turn it into an actual story.
Right.
And he didn't pitch it to Disney until 2001. So it was something that definitely got time to develop. And he ended up not directing it because he came out saying he had a heart attack in 2008. So he stepped down. He was the lead animator. So he's still really involved with it. And it got transferred over to different directors. But they developed this movie, Tangled, is the most expensive animated film ever, with $260 million spent to make it.
Is it the hair?
Part of it's the software. Part of it's the software. And to compare that, Frozen 2 was $150. And this was $260. And what it spent.
They also lucked out, though, because they had the animation from Moana to use.
Yes, they did. In Frozen 2, they upgraded the Splash software. And in Tangled, they kind of had to create this hair software.
Yeah.
Because she has 70 feet of it. It's 70 feet in the Disney version. There's 70
she uses it a lot. It's not
just
an accessory. Like she uses it.
Yeah, it's a character in itself, and making all of those strands of hair work and move the correct way, I can't imagine. So that was part of it. But the biggest part of it was the amount of changes in story that happened. So they developed it. They were supposed to release it. Let me get this year right. They were supposed to release it in 2007. It came out in 2010 as the 50th animated feature film. So it was this big to-do. But they moved it back because they wanted to get the story right. So when you redevelop a story, you have to go through storyboards, visual design, writing. It's a whole, and that was the most expensive part, was the amount of reworking the story went. Because at one point, they wanted to make it almost Shrek-like and satirical. And Glenn Keane pretty much said, no, we're not doing that.
You get Shorty.
Yeah, that's about, and there's a lot of great comedy in it, but it's still a very genuine story.
Mm-hmm.
So at one point there was that discussion and he said, absolutely not, I'll walk. I can't do that kind of film. So he stayed and they took it back to being a genuine story in it. So there's a lot of discussion of how, because they created an entire mythology and they created more of one for the series that came out. But
yeah, I would say they created it more for the series than the movie. The movie was very original Rapunzel, original the Grimm's fairy tale, but with a lot more character development.
Yes. And I really loved what they did with the flower, because you can see they came up with it from the rampion flower. It definitely looks like it. They get the magic from the healing tears that randomly happen in the Grimm. Right. There's no explanation. It's not a world that has magic, really, other than that being a sorceress.
Right.
They don't really discuss any kind of magic in the Grimm fairy tale until she magically heals his tears. But you can see kind of where they get that, but they created the magic, the sun drop. There's a lot of sunshine imagery in the original tale, and they keep the theme up. I think there's a line about her being like sunshine in the original tale, so they kind of took it and ran with it.
They ran with it. That's the emblem of Corona.
And they also this is the first Walt Disney princess that was 3D, and Glenn Keane originally had wanted it to be 2D, and they went through a whole pros and cons meeting about what that meant. And so in order to make it still feel like a 2D animated, you had Glenn Keane, who was this famous 2D animator, heading up trying to make it feel as flowy and as natural as hand-drawn animation. So that also took time, and the visual development was trying to make it look like an oil painting. So the idea for the backgrounds and for her, and you can tell with the highlighting, specifically with her hair, I noticed it felt very oil painty. And the very specific painting that inspired the look of Tangled was the swing. And you see the swing in Frozen.
Yeah.
When Anna is jumping.
Jumps into it.
So it's a Rococo painting. And that's what inspired the visual look of
That's so
Tangled.
Interesting that back to back we have spoken about backgrounds that are based in a paint style.
Yeah.
But they're so different.
They're so different.
The watercolor versus the actual watercolor versus the CGI oil paint.
And they're pretty opposite. It's like as opposite as you can go, because you have physical watercolor backgrounds,
right,
and animated oil painting backgrounds.
That's crazy.
It's water and oil. It's great. But it's beautiful, and you can tell that they're not trying to make it realistic. I read that before I rewatched it, and I could start seeing in the coloring how bright it was, and how high the highlights are really pop on her hair to make it feel oily and slick. It kind of looks like she has a very slick ribbon behind her rather than physical hair pieces. And they do a really good job of animating her 70 feet of hair through it. And something that I discovered in my research was that they specifically called, and you probably already know this, but they specifically called it Tangled to make it gender neutral.
Yep, that was the start of that.
And it did, I think. I thought the story was very successful at having something for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We'll get into that. But another huge part of the movie and the series specifically, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there, but Claire Keane, who is the daughter of Glenn Keane, was the visual development artist who was in charge of Rapunzel's paintings. So she designed how Rapunzel paints and what her murals look like, which affected the style. It's beautiful, and it's whimsical and childlike, but sophisticated. Right. And that inspired the art style of the Tangled series. So she worked on the series as well, but she was in charge of kind of painting Rapunzel's paintings. And how cool is that? To have your dad kind of create the beginnings of the story, and then you get to kind of bring her to life. And her being an artist, I'm sure there was a lot of very meta stuff happening.
Connection there.
Yeah. And we reunite Alan Menken and Glenn Slater. They've done a lot of projects together. What he wanted to do with the music of this movie was blend medieval and 1960s folk, which I think he accomplishes.
Oh, the Kingdom Dance on the soundtrack is 1,000% that.
Yep. And the hardest part of their story development, from what I understand, is figuring out how to not end the movie as soon as she leaves the tower.
Oh,
that was when you take the original story.
Yeah.
What do you do? And it took them a while to figure that out. And one of the story artists came in and mentioned these floating lanterns, which were big festivals in Indonesia and Asia where they were really popular. And it brought this idea. And that completely opened up the entire story.
And what they come up with isn't too abstract. I think it's really, it's very easily understandable by all ages. And they set it up very clearly, which is good because I think that makes Rapunzel she has a strong story, a strong and concise story to build this fantastic character in. Like the world is solid. The world is solid, easily understandable, easily attainable. Great.
Yeah. So that's kind of the how Disney took it from the origins and into that. So what were your initial reactions with the movie after watching it?
So I don't think I saw it in theaters. To be honest, I'm not sure if I did. Although I did grow up in a really small town and we would often get movies months late. It was, though, one of the first DVDs that I got on my own to have and watch a lot. I think it's a really solid, good story and easily one of the best princess movies that Disney has done. It's very attainable for kids. The solid world building just like gave them more room to play with Rapunzel. Like they just briefly glossed over like, this is how the magic works. You accept it. You move on. It's enough that you're like, okay, cool. I don't have a whole lot of questions that I feel like I need answered. But ambiguous enough that when they made the series, it was like, heck yes.
Yes. I've fallen in love with that series.
Yeah. She's great though. Rapunzel is phenomenal.
She's fantastic. She is so resilient. And something that hit me more this year after our 2020 adventure.
Yeah.
Is
adventure.
I'll use a nice. Is we were all in quarantine for most of this year, and she was in quarantine for 18 years. So it's something that was very pertinent about this movie after this year. How does she have the energy at 7 in the morning to do like it opens with this? It's not a storybook opening, which they did try. You can watch some of the deleted ideas that they had.
Didn't work. Did
not
and they're
work.
like, Flynn, you want to try this? And he's like, all right. And they're like, oh, this works. How weird.
It's so like you instantly already like the romantic interest, because he introduces it in such a fun way. You get the full story, you get the feeling for the parents, and then you get this beautiful introduction to her where you instantly know it's not like the Grimm fairy tale because she is choosing to stay in the tower. She's not physically trapped there.
Right.
She is emotionally trapped there.
She has no idea she's trapped there.
Yeah, it's terrifying when you really break it down that she is there because of fear that has been instilled in her by Gothel.
It is very impressive for Rapunzel, being as young as she is, being gaslit by someone.
Yes.
For her to still be so positive and upbeat. She is the Hufflepuffest Hufflepuff I've ever heard of.
I just wrote gaslighting in capital letters rewatching this, and I looked up the definition just to like remind myself that I was using the term right. And it's gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse that's seen in abusive relationships. It's the act of manipulating a person by forcing them to question their thoughts, memories, and the events occurring around them.
That wasn't 2020 or Tangled.
But and that's what I don't even think I knew that word existed until the last few years. And so the emotional abuse in this film and Rapunzel being the victim of it is so complex.
Mm-hmm.
And you get it as soon as Gothel walks in and checks herself in that mirror.
Yes. Oh, look, beautiful woman. Oh, you're there too.
It's you. It's instant. And it triggers an understanding of that relationship so fast. Because even if you don't have that with someone, you know people who do that, or you know people who've dealt with that.
Well, and it's so cleverly done because you see how she reacts with Rapunzel. There's moments where you're like, oh, this is why Rapunzel hasn't left and why she believes Gothel. There's moments where, you know, she hugs her and offers to get her these paints she loves and makes her favorite soups. And you know it's not out of love for Rapunzel. No. It's out of just her intelligence and her manipulating the situation. But, you know, she's not Ursula. She's not Maleficent, where you meet her and you're like, that's the bad guy.
Yeah.
Like, you know?
She's
like outside we see, but Rapunzel, you can see from her point of view of why she wouldn't have known. Like, it doesn't make her dumb.
No, she's not dumb. And I really appreciated that she's naive, but she's extremely smart.
Yes.
She's just casually like, I chart stars. It's like, okay. She's incredibly smart. She's incredibly resourceful. I mean,
that's more so. I feel like she's more so resourceful, and she thinks outside of the box more than others.
Yeah. And something else that I really love about her as a princess character and what the ideals of the heroine and the Disney princess is that she's extremely kind to everyone she meets. She judges no one. To the point of like making friends with ex-convicts. Yeah. she's just this 18-year-old blonde girl walking into this horrible ruffian bar.
Terrified. But sirs, when push comes to shove,
give me back my guide. Like, instead of cowering in the corner or running away, she hits him with like a stick and is like, put him down. Right. To this group of huge, really intimidating ex-convicts.
Right.
And there's something that she is a much better human being than I will ever be. She doesn't judge anyone, and the story proves that you shouldn't. There's so many parts of the story that are so subtly brilliant and progressive. Yeah. And this was pre-Me Too. So this is when it was still very popular and feminism was still gaining a lot of traction. But it was before it was out in the open and groups of women were collaborating and being angry together about what was happening. Right. So I find it really interesting how progressive this film is. And I love it.
I like it a lot. I love it. Something cool that I really appreciated that I did not notice the first couple times I watched this was that, and especially relating to Rapunzel and not judging people and just being the saint that she is very naive, though, you know, which comes up a lot. And it's fine to be naive. It's a very cool story in that it's very much discovering herself as well is part of it, which is really cool. But something that I found interesting is that Mother Gothel, every time she says, I love you, she's touching Rapunzel's hair. Whereas Flynn, anytime he speaks to her, watch it, he is pushing it out of her face. He's like, Blondie, what are we doing right now? Like,
ignore, like getting it away.
Right. Or, you know, when he tells her his feelings for her and everything, it's always, anytime he's speaking to her, he's speaking to her. He's not speaking to her hair.
Every time she kisses her, it's her head. Every time she pats her on the head, it's her hair. Like, it's any interaction.
Which makes that naive Rapunzel be like, oh, yes, she does love me. She's kissing me. She's hugging me. She's telling me how much she loves me. And just totally not seeing that. And that is, I think it's cool that sometimes her naivete. However, India just said it. Is a lot of times a great thing, but sometimes it has consequences as well, which I think is good. It's good to give her some well-rounded features.
She has flaws. Like, she's a brilliant heroine, but she has flaws. And the best part about this movie and the series, it's more in the series because you spend, 70 episodes with them.
Right.
But in the movie, the emotional maturity in which they talk about their feelings, and definitely in the series, but it's an open communication. None of the plot points happen because someone doesn't know how to express themselves, or someone is yelling at someone, or someone's upset. Like, they end up talking about it. And they end up like Eugene
whether
gets
or
to
not
have
Flynn
it.
wants to.
Yeah.
They end up talking about it.
They end up talking about it. And it's amazing. And in this, you see the beginnings of it with him telling her his real name right before they're about to, drown. There's a lot of action. That's something I noticed.
Yes.
She turns into an Indiana Jones action star after the Snuggly Duckling when they're running away from Maximus and the guards.
She's clever. She's able to see and think outside of the box, which I think is very unique from past characters we've met. She's not just traditionally smart. She is ingenuitive.
Yeah. And she's physically fit. Because when you're seeing her swing around the rafters, I'm like, she's got to have amazing biceps and triceps. Like, that's a lot of pulling people up. It makes me more believable when she shoves Flynn in the closet. She can hit. And so much of the comedy in it undercuts the sentimentality, which I really appreciate. Because right when she has that first look moment where like love at first sight with him, because she sees him on the floor and there's this romantic music swelling, and then he twitches and she hits him again.
Yes.
Like, so every time that they're really close to being gooey or being sentimental, either Flynn makes a joke or she does something quirky. She's like the first awkward princess, too. But the awkwardness that they allow and the quirkiness that they allow is so different than when you have these very old-fashioned feeling romantic interests and romantic princesses.
Right.
And you have one who's I don't know how she has any self-confidence after the emotional abuse she has been through. She is so insecure, but also so brave. And I find that really fascinating. And I appreciate that she was like 18 and they let her have emotions. The joy and stress montage when she's like, I'm a horrible human being.
Yes.
It's the best day ever. That montage is hysterical.
Oh, it's so funny.
But it's so real.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Everyone has had that moment. Like, it's so brilliantly done. And Flynn's face.
Every time it's just getting and everyone's been Flynn too. Everyone's been Flynn looking at their friend going through all of these things, and you're like, it's really you could just you just okay. You
let it happen.
No, okay, all right.
But they let her have all of these emotions and they let her have so much joy, and they actually deal with the idea of her being locked in a tower for 18 years.
Right. Oh my gosh, yes. Which is so different and good.
Yeah,
not good that she was locked in a tower, but good to watch her unpack that kind of stuff and really become herself. Because throwing back to what you had said, women feeling trapped in their own selves. Rapunzel had an unintentional trapped life, and she's still continuing that throughout the story, where she's like, oh no. I'm going to really upset Mother. This is going to be really bad for Mother. And she stands up to Mother, and it still isn't good enough for her because she's still in the back of her head. She's still trapped. It's not until Flynn comes up and they save each other. They definitely save each other. It is not a he comes to save the day because he does come to save the day, but he doesn't save the movie. I appreciate that they fall in love and you watch them fall in love. It's not a love at first sight.
Yeah, they actually, you can see them have an emotional connection that can grow from there. You see him grow as a person because of her. And you see her, and you see her realize what she's been told is wrong, one checkbox at a time. He was a man who came to the tower, did not have pointy teeth. She met a whole bunch of ruffians and they sang about their dreams. Everything that Gothel sets up in Mother Knows Best, which was brilliantly done, is proven wrong in the film. And so she has to deal with that. And it's not until she then has her heart broken, even though Gothel's manipulated the whole situation, until she finds out in her subconscious that she's the lost princess.
Right.
I think it's so well crafted, and everyone has complex feelings. She even says like it's complicated when he asks why she stayed, or
right. And that's so cool because like at the beginning of their because they were friends first. They did not. Flynn, yes, he does here's the smolder, but it wasn't real.
No.
Like he wasn't like, I'm going to woo this girl. He was like, I'm going to manipulate this girl.
Yep.
Like you see him not have interest in her romantically until like halfway through the movie. And the same to her, even though we'll talk about this later, but he's the hot guy.
Yes.
He's, she doesn't go to that. And that's a big thing with her, which is really cool, is that she is so focused on her dreams, and not in a bad way. She has these dreams and she really wants to get them, and she doesn't let a pretty face or whatever get in her way of attaining those. And that is something I think that's really good. You still have the love, you still have the romance and all that, which we adore. But first and foremost, she needs to do things that she wants, this goal. She wants to achieve this goal.
Yeah.
Which then...
It's so simple. It's just, I just want to see the lanterns. That's all she, like, it's such a simple, such a simple goal. And then on the boat, he has this beautiful line of, then you get to find a new dream. What if it's not everything? And what if it is everything I dreamed of? And it's such a good lesson, because I See the Light is one of my favorite Disney duets of all time.
It's so well done.
It's beautiful.
Because he understands. She doesn't totally get it too at this point. Like she's talking about how he may like me.
Yeah.
Very naive and sweet. And he is much older.
Yeah.
Not a ton, but he's a bit older.
26?
Something like that. Yeah, 25 or 26. But like Flynn knows. Flynn's like, nah, I'm in love with this girl. And I did not fully realize it till right now. And I'm in love with her. And she's like, I love my dreams. And maybe I kind of like him. Flynn is one of the few portrayed womanizers who becomes better that feels less icky than typically that story is. And it's totally entirely because of Rapunzel's goodness. It's not because Rapunzel is the sexiest girl he's met and he can't be with anybody else. Like it's purely her goodness and her faith in him, and because he hasn't had that up until
he's a pure cynic and she's the pure optimist. So you have these people clashing and learning from each other, and it's beautiful. And something that hit me this time watching it and thinking it more in depth about how it's crafted, I really appreciate that her gender has nothing to do with the story. You honestly could switch her and Eugene, and the story would still happen as it does.
Yes.
She's never held back.
It's very different from, as previously mentioned, the Jasmine, where you have the personality starting, where the girls are very different and not just traditional kind and more complacent women. You know, Jasmine is not that.
Not at all.
But her gender still very much affects her situation. And then moving forward to this, it's, like you said, it's not.
Her soprano voice doesn't attract him.
No.
She doesn't know she's a princess the entire movie. He doesn't know she's a princess until after he's dead. Because he's never learned it. I'm like, oh, he has no idea. He's just trying to save her.
Yeah. And that was a really powerful moment that she changed this man so much in a non-icky way, like you said, that he was going there for her. Not for Jules. There was no game to be played.
If he had known she was the princess, he was someone who stole a tiara for money.
Right.
So he threw it to the Stabbingtons. And something that hit me when I was watching it too is I See the Light is very similar feeling to A Whole New World. And I was started debating with my husband about A Whole New World versus this and why it feels different and why I like I See the Light better. And I think it's because though both of them are beautifully written and beautifully staged, I See the Light is self-discovery from each person.
Yes.
Instead of let me show you things, it's both people learning something about themselves and changing to come together.
I love it.
I love it so much. And to wrap up the Disney story, it gets very dark very fast when Rapunzel realizes she's a princess. Gothel tries all of her tactics and they don't work. And then she gets trapped by Gothel. Eugene gets stabbed.
He dies. He straight up dies.
And you see a little bit of blood. Like, they did very good. They didn't have blood from the knife, but they had it under his vest. And you see her see it. She completely self-sacrifices to save him because she knows that she's going to be an abusive prisoner her whole life.
Yeah.
And he saves her with the hair cutting and completely destroys Mother. When Rapunzel reaches for Gothel as she comes out the window, did you notice that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
She still loves her.
She still...
It just hit me in a place.
Yeah. She still loves her. That's still, for all intents and purposes, her mother. She doesn't want anybody to die. She is outside of this lanterns moment where she really wants to see the lanterns is so self-sacrificing. Like everyone else's priorities are above her own. Like she is so kind.
I strive to find her optimism and kindness. It's very genuine and it's complex because she does have flaws and you get to learn more of them in the series, which we're about to get to. The story itself is so tight and it's Gothel is not magic, which is also similar to when we talked about Frollo. What's so evil about her is the human part of her, which is complete narcissistic, emotional gaslighter. It's very real. I think it's a brilliantly written film, and I think she's a really wonderful role model for how we should try and strive to be, though I don't know how she is after what she's been through.
I do like that they chose Mandy Moore as her voice. I think she has a really nice voice for youth, but has that like kind tones to it. I don't know. It was a very good choice. It felt very... a very good choice for Rapunzel.
I thought the vocal cast was brilliant in this. I thought they did a really wonderful job. Yeah. I really liked that they had her kiss him at the end, that she dips him at the end. So it's all of these things that I forgot were so progressive. I will say what they had to fix in the series was the lack of diversity in this film.
Yes.
That was disappointing, especially because Princess Frog was released in 2009. So they just went from a film that got to actually represent people of color, and they went to an all-white, and not like main character. It is set in more German style place.
But it's also fake. Corona's not real.
And you can have, it goes back to the background. The background people were all white, and that was disappointing. It doesn't even really give it a date. Like, I tried to look up exactly when it was set, and it's like late 1700s, early 1800s.
Right.
German kind of kingdom of Corona. Like, it wasn't like it's set here and here. That was a little disappointing to me, but they did a really good job of fixing that in the series, I felt.
Yeah.
And there was no other women in it. It was Rapunzel and Gothel. There was no female ruffians. There were no female guards. Pascal and Maximus were gendered as male. So there wasn't any other.
It does pass the Bechdel test.
It does.
Because Mother Gothel doesn't talk about men unless she's trying to terrify Rapunzel.
She just talks about herself. So it does pass that. And there are a lot of scenes between those two. But there's no female anything else.
No.
Which is fixed in the series as well. So those are like my two big, hey guys, maybe if we were going to improve it. Because the story was so tight that I'm like, if we're going to improve this, maybe we'd talk about that.
Yeah, it also broke, I mean, we could talk about this more in After Hours, but just as a statement, it broke some gender norms for men as well.
Yeah, I have lots of discussions about the ruffians and that I really enjoyed. It really broke a lot of things, gender stereotypes without
a good movie, guys.
It's good. It's without shouting about it. And that's what I think was so brilliant is I forgot how many. So after this, the next thing they did with Tangled was the short Ever After.
Yes.
So it came out in 2012. Married. They get married. She still has
a classic short where it's about the sidekicks.
There's
always the fun sidekick short. That was this one.
So there's not much to talk about with Rapunzel and that other than like it was really cute. They still had, that was CG, is before they went 2D with the series. But what I just like kind of screamed to myself when I rewatched it was they say, you may kiss. They do not say, you may kiss the bride.
Because they are equals and they always play themselves as equals.
I just like, if I put it, they just said, you may kiss. They didn't say you may kiss the bride. It was something I completely forgot. And it was, that's the only note I have for Ever After because it was just cute and it had nothing to do with her. But that one line just like got me very excited about it.
I love their relationship is great. And
it's fabulous.
going into the short, because the next is the little baby short that leads you into the series.
Yeah, it's the before ever after, and this is when they introduce the 2D art style. They introduce the beginning of the series. It's like 45 minutes, I think. It was a
decent little
mini
short.
movie. Yeah.
So I think it's very clever because they were able to, clearly they thought about this, put in this full story arc that didn't go against anything that happened after. Like they had set this precedent of they get married in this short, and this is what she looks like, this is what he looks like, this is what's happening, and they are able to have a full story and then come back and there aren't any big plot holes.
No, they did a really good job of accepting these are the frameworks we're working in. And so the Tangled series came out in 2017 and it just wrapped up in 2020. It was 3 seasons. And it takes place after the first movie and before ever after the marriage. So you have this few years. And that kind of stems from Eugene saying, and after years and years of asking, I finally said yes. It's like, oh, it comes off of that. And so this is 7 years after the first movie. It was definitely something they had to approve. And Chris Sorensen was the showrunner on this series. And he came up with the mythology behind it and pitched to them, this is what I want to do with it. This is how it works. And kind of ran it past the original directors, ran it past Glenn Keane. He had to run it past Mandy Moore and Zachary Levi and Alan Menken.
Because they got everybody back, which
everyone came back.
Which is great. It really makes the difference.
It really did. And he said in an interview with the Bancroft brothers that Zachary Levi was the one that was hardest to convince. Because Zachary Levi runs a YouTube channel and like his own little website called Nerd HQ. And basically they kind of tear apart mythologies and sci-fi and fantasy and nerd stuff. And so he's someone who digs into other people for not making sense with mythology.
Oh, so he was like, I don't know about this.
Yeah. And so the showrunner said that he was the one he had like 80% of it figured out. And Zachary Levi was the one who kept asking questions and helped him make sure it was airtight, because he kept being like, well, what about this? And what's this? And how does this make sense?
Right.
Like, so.
Well, you could tell it is very well crafted. I think only having 3 seasons was also smart. This show also did not feel like a money grab. I mean, there were different costumes and different wigs and different hair, not wigs, but hair styles.
Yeah. She got her hair back. You know.
And it was different. You can't just use the old hairstyle. You got to have a new one, so you can buy a new one and a new dress, and so that happens. But the story itself was very true to the character, and there was even more character development with her in a great way, and all the characters around her.
I was blown away by everyone gets a story. There are multiple episodes where Rapunzel is kind of in it, but not really, and characters get to develop, and she gets to develop with them. It was sophisticated. And that's what I mentioned earlier. The emotional maturity of these characters is kind of unmatched. They talk about how they feel. In the short that opened the series, Before Ever After, Eugene proposes and she says, not now, but I love you.
And he doesn't leave because they are equals.
He doesn't get mad.
Very much stated. You. What's really cool about Rapunzel and his relationship is it's no longer Rapunzel and Flynn. They are a unit, and not in a bad way, not in a weird goopy, like
not codependent,
they are equals. And I think that is a really important thing for kids at a young age to see, because even though Eugene comes from nothing and he was a villain in his own right, and she's a princess, they are equals. Their relationship is very much symbiotic, and they work together, and they lift each other up when they need it, even in small amounts.
Yes.
Even just little side comments they make to each other. They are together on this. And they do have moments where they fight, which is very relatable. But I think it is one of the most healthy relationships for people, especially at a young age, to watch how they interact with each other and validate each other.
In the 45-minute short, you really get a full arc in this Before Ever After short that sets up the series really lovely. And instead of being heartbroken, I mean, he's hurt when she says no.
Oh, of course.
But then instead of, usually when you have that moment, and which is hardly never in Disney, so this is still unique, the fact that she has said no in front of her entire kingdom. But she is also dealing with the fact that she's now trapped in a different way. You actually address the father's PTSD of losing his daughter. And that was one of the things that the directors of Tangled talked to the showrunner of the series. And their biggest questions for him were, what is the relationship with the parents? Because they've never talked before.
Right.
This is the first time they've ever been given lines. And so the first season is really her relationship with them and with what it meant to be a princess after being locked in a tower and not being able to see the world. So they're dealing with really complex emotional things and also having funny stories in them. Like it's really incredible.
It's still a kids show. It's still a kids show. They still have the silly stories. They still have the fun things. But she does grow and become more of a heroine, if that is possible.
I didn't think it was, but you see her be upset. You see her deal with like anger at people.
Well, and her coming to terms with it's okay to not like everybody. Where that her and that baker
Monty
really don't like each other. Her and Monty don't like each other, and that's just they've accepted it. And that's how it is. And they're fine with it. Like, that was a really big character development for her. It's okay. It's okay to not love everyone. Not everyone is going to be your cup of tea, and that's all right. But also be respectful. They are still respectful for each other, even though they may be... it's like a mutual understanding.
And I actually found myself as an adult watching it, learning great communication skills. Because there's just no way that I could, after being denied a proposal, go up and be like, I'm so sorry I did that to you in front of everyone. Can we talk about this? I love you. I will wait. And she asked him to be patient with her.
The amount of times they say that they love each other, too. Like, there is no question ever, even when you meet ex-fiancés and stuff.
Yeah, there's some really good storytelling, but in the end, it's never about them not loving each other. And even, I think it's one of the best story developments with female friendships that I've seen, period. It's her and Cassandra are like yin and yang. They're only a couple of years apart. I think Cassandra's 4 years older, but you have another cynic, and her like not liking Eugene, I think, is fascinating, and how they both love Rapunzel.
Eugene and Cassandra have the best one-liners I've ever heard.
They're so good. And you see her and Rapunzel learn to be friends, even though they're so different. You see them learn to be better people because of it. The first season to me was about her and her parents' relationship. And dealing with what it means to be a princess after not being one for 18 years. And the dad's PTSD, which is a fascinating thing to watch. And then you had the second season, which is kind of the adventure season. You're discovering the mythology behind the whole thing. It's her and
meeting characters that will be important later.
Yeah, her and Eugene's relationship developing because he hasn't proposed again yet. But then you have a whole couple where she tries to almost propose to him at one point, and then he's like, oh, I understand why you want to wait. So she doesn't. So there's those things happening. And then her and Cassandra are growing because there's no other guards around. There's no other parents around. It's just them. So their relationship grows and then gets tested because season 3 is about rebuilding that relationship. So I think they go through so much because her being Gothel's other daughter is incredibly complex and fits. It like actually makes more sense of why she didn't move Rapunzel half a way around the world. Like, why would you just be a horse right away if you took a daughter? But then Cassandra has to go through finding out who her mother is and being jealous that her mother was taken away because of her. Like, it's brilliant. So they have to work through that. You have Varian, who is the cute, nerdy science kid turned villain, get redemption arced to help save the day. Like, he has entire arc.
They're all so understandable, and it's so subtle watching her and Cassandra fall apart and then getting back together is not subtle, but the falling apart was subtle, and you had all those callbacks, and then after the big moment of the season finale of season 2, you're like, oh. But also, that checks out.
It all fits. And you can tell that I love that they made the decision to end it at season 3. Because
Yes.
they did 1, then they were approved for 2, and then they chose to end it at 3. So
I think that was really smart because it was a fully completed story. It mashed up with everything. Rapunzel had a full arc. They did all the corny things that were kind of forced, but not too much.
Yeah.
But all the corny stuff from the movie, like for kids, it's great. They're going to cry. They're going to love it. It's going to be great. Yeah. Especially for a kids show. I think 3 seasons was beautifully done. It
was marketed for kids, but it was more for the kids who saw Tangled as young kids and were kind of in that tween. You're dealing with more like relationship-y stuff. You're dealing with real action.
Right.
The 3rd season is this epic constant battle trying to win back the kingdom from Varian and the people who took over, and then she has to deal with Cassandra with magic powers now. And the voice cast, they got Broadway singers. They gave them amazing numbers. Like the soundtrack is pretty phenomenal. You have Eden Espinosa as Cassandra, who just blows everyone out of the water when she sings Crossing the Line. She's just phenomenal. And so you have multiple female characters. You have a mom who has a complicated relationship with her sister too. Like you have a lot more diversity in the cast. So I think they really fixed a lot of the few things I thought about with the first movie. You got to know these characters. I think she's become one of my favorites because of the series. Because you get to know
it's
her.
Very well done. You do. You get to live with her. You get to her journal. I would love to see her actual journal because she uses it to grow and to. Journaling itself is so important, and the fact that she journals through art is even better. It's so cool, and I think it teaches kids a lot of things because she is very, very open about her feelings and everything. And learn a lot from her.
And the style of the show, from what the showrunner said, it's a 2D. They picked that pretty early on to make it 2D, which I think was really smart because then you're never comparing it to the movie and they would never be able to do the quality of the movie. No. There's just no way you can put out that kind of show.
No, and we've seen from other shows and other characters that we've been doing just for these past few podcasts that the TV show and the second movies, it's like it's almost jarring. Not quite, but it's almost jarring. Whereas this, I think it was very smart for them to make a choice.
A completely different style, a completely different medium with 2D animation. And technology has caught up a little bit too to help them with 2D animation to make it swift and smooth and beautiful because it's not all hand drawn. But they also chose to make it look like her painting journal. So
was so cool.
It's so cool because when you really, I'm like, oh, that's it is. It's her. That's why the Claire Keane helped develop the series because she was the one who did her murals. And there's no outlines on them. There's a lot of textures. And you can see some of the brush strokes in the backgrounds and in the character shading. He wanted to make it look like if Rapunzel was telling her own story. This is the show she would make. So that was kind of the idea behind the look of it. And I think they were really successful.
Oh, yeah.
It's beautiful. It doesn't feel like the original. It was jarring to watch the original movie after I'd watched the television show recently.
Because it is so different. It is so different. But the success is because it didn't feel like an accident. It felt like a choice.
Yeah, it felt like an artistic style choice. And it separates it. But when you have the original cast and when you have a writing team for the series that really embraced who she was, and when they actually deal with things like PTSD and they deal with her feeling trapped or her not knowing what to do, you deal with Eugene's past too. They don't ignore it. He's not just automatically this great person.
No.
And the look
Which is great.
The look of her dad in Before Ever After when he proposes, I instantly went, "You didn't ask him, did you? You didn't check this out."
Which is also kind of cool.
Yeah.
Because personally, I think that tradition, it shouldn't be an ask.
Yeah.
It should be a heads up.
Yeah, nice heads up.
I am not a prize to be won.
Yes.
I can make my own decisions. If I say no, I say no.
Yep.
So I liked it. I thought it was fun that he didn't. And it felt very them.
Yeah, it did. It felt like perfectly like them. And then you deal kind of with that the father-son-in-law relationship too in this. Yeah, there's just a lot that you actually get to explore because, I mean, each season is, I think, 23 episodes. And some of them
around there.
Yeah, and some of them have a lot of, there's a 3-parter at one point, I think.
The last is a 3-part. The second series is a 2. I literally busted through these this week.
There's a lot. There's just a lot that happens in it, and there's a lot of action. I think they really took the time to get to know Rapunzel and who they wanted her to be, more so than some of the other princesses before, and sometimes even after, because it felt like everything from the plot was about character development. Yeah. It probably came from the fact that it's such a sparse story to begin with.
Truly. And I think that was what was so great is they explained the story, they did it. Here's the backdrop, here's the set. Go.
Go. See what happens.
That's great because you get to learn more about them than you do in other stories because there is so much plot, which is fine. Plot-driven stories are not bad. It just you get more about Rapunzel because it's character-driven.
And I'm really happy that Glenn Keane fought against the Shrekization satirical version of this because there's so much comedy and the cartoon physics that exist in this movie. Because, I mean, he would be dead after getting hit in the head. So
everyone hit with a frying pan would be dead. Well, even Flynn calls it out. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever done.
He's addresses the magic of it in a way. Yeah. So he's the reason that we buy into it because it's a realistic world.
Yeah.
That just has a magical flower in it. So, and a horse that is a person. Right. So he's the one who addresses the fact that, that this is weird.
Which her makes sense because with the narrator and everything, they tie that in really well, which is good. I'm glad that it wasn't Rapunzel. I'm glad that Rapunzel is in the world, living it, and you just get to live in the world with her, as opposed to watching. Eugene's like telling the story kind of.
He's our in as the audience. We experience it with him, but Rapunzel's the one everything's like happening to. Yeah,
which is great. I think that's really cool.
I think it's brilliant. And I want to give a fun fact to end us off. I'm trying to.
We love fun facts.
I watched a little documentary. They had like an Untangled documentary they made of it for the making of. Oh, okay. This is a fun fact. So Pascal, her little chameleon friend we all love. We get to know him really well on those series. The frog, love it. So they had chosen the chameleon, and one of the animators bought a pet chameleon and named it Pascal.
Okay.
And so she brought it in. So I think it was someone who probably was working on Pascal. I don't know for sure, but that makes sense to me. So I'm going to...
Right.
And so she named it Pascal, and they would use the chameleon to help with the animation and watch and observe. Because you can bring that in more so than you can bring a lion in that much. And they did that when they did Lion King.
Oh, yeah.
But they asked her what she named it, and she said Pascal. And then they're like, can we use it? So Pascal is named after Pascal the chameleon.
Oh man!
Who was the animator's little thing? And so my fun fact is that she is named as and credited as a chameleon wrangler in the credits because
amazing.
So I thought that was really sweet. But yeah,
cool.
It's wonderful. Thanks for joining us on this long adventure with the 70-foot hair with Rapunzel. With Blondie. 70 feet of hair. And in the Grimm, it was 75. And in
Haircut
Personette, it was 90 feet.
Wow.
So she got shorter as she progressed. They're like, oh, that's too long. 70 feet.
Gotta make it more manageable.
Fantastic. I hope you guys join us next week. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Damsels in Dialogue. Tune in next week as we travel to ancient Greece and meet a damsel who may be in distress, but can definitely handle it. Megara.
If you enjoyed listening today, we'd love to have you subscribe to this podcast and share with friends.
If you really enjoyed our discussion, you can find more behind-the-scenes content, a peek at our research notes, and even entire bonus episodes on Patreon. Each month, we release a full after-hours episode where we discuss the movies we cover in each episode unfiltered and unrestrained, along with behind-the-scenes extras and notes.
You can reach us on social media. Links to all our platforms can be found in our About section. Until next time, this has been Damsels in Dialogue.
Have a nice day.
This podcast is sponsored by Royal Princess Parties, LLC, and is produced by Hello Out There Audio, part of Hello Out There Productions.